Hello and welcome to Makers.dev, episode 23. I am Chris. Christian is out this week, so I have a guest. This is Matt Swanson. Matt's a developer. He writes a lot about Ruby on Rails, general maker as well. Hi, Matt. How's it going?
Hey, Chris. How's it going?
It's going pretty
Chris and I are buddies from the Indianapolis software area. So, I'm a listener of the show, and I've been bugging Chris about when the episode was going to be out, and he judo reversed me and is making me help him record this week.
That's right. So I guess if you want to give a little bit of background about who you are and what you do and what kind of projects you have going on, that'd be good.
Yep. So I'm a software developer. I work at a consulting company in Indianapolis, and I have one kind of main project that I've been working on for close to 2.5, 3 years now, and it's a Rails app that tracks analytics for oncology and rare disease drugs. So when drugs launch to the market, we help some analysts track a bunch of data about how they are getting covered in the market from all the different insurance companies. So that's kind of my main day job, and then I've got a couple various side projects going on. Probably the most the one that's getting the most traction is Boring Rails, which is a Rails blog and newsletter that I run that talks about Ruby on Rails development and kind of building things in the most boring way possible, but it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek.
Great. So what? Let's see. I guess we could start with you. So what have you been up to, say, this last week? That's usually what Christian and I do. And what kind of stuff do you have coming up? What kind of decisions are you making?
Well, it's basically the time of vacations and normally spring break, but I think everyone is just ready for a little bit of a break. So, yeah, I was off last week, and that kind of creates the situation where the week before vacation is really busy because I'm trying to get things set up. I have a team of 3 people, and there's myself, there's another kind of senior developer, and then we have an apprentice who's sort of a career changer person. So making sure that I get them set up when I'm out for a week, being able to keep working and have stuff to do. That makes week N-1 super busy. Then there's vacation, and try not to do anything. And then you come back, which is this week, and you sort of play catch up. So it's been a pretty crazy couple of weeks, with vacation in the middle. But yeah, so we're working on a couple of big features for that project. The kind of most interesting thing maybe for us to chat about is we're trying to figure out right now the main deliverable of this software is this massive Excel file. So people are using a web application to do all the data entry and do searches and filtering and analyzing the data, but then the output is this big Excel file that gets sent to the drug companies for their internal teams to use. And so from their perspective, it's really great because instead of having to go to hundreds of different websites for all the different insurance companies, find policies for their drug, read through them, figure out how it all compares to the other ones, they just get this kind of nice Excel file that has everything sort of already pulled out into different fields. And so that's great for them. It's sort of not so great for the people that have to, write software that's, interfacing with Excel, and also the people that are doing the analysis have to kind of sometimes massage things into special formats for Excel. So we've been working on figuring out if we should build a web-based dashboard instead of the Excel file. And the programmer in me and the engineer is yes, for sure, this would be way better. We can it'll be so much faster to iterate on these things. It'll look a lot nicer. Anyone can access it. We can start doing a bunch of neat stuff. But then the reality of the business is no, they kind of like getting this thing emailed to them every month, and there's almost like a consulting nature to it. So saying, oh yeah, just kind of log into your client dashboard sort of loses the in-person touch point that the company has, where they send them a personal email with this Excel file, and it they pass this Excel file around versus like, oh yeah, it's like yet another web portal that nobody looks at.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something I run into all the time too. It's kind of like build versus buy for companies, right? Yeah. Do you build a fancy new thing, or do you stick with what you have? Like, stick with that kind of boring but works solution. Do the people have your customers, or I guess has the end users expressed any interest in having it be a dashboard, or do they just really kind of like the Excel file?
Well, so that's what we're trying to figure out right now. So we've been doing customer interviews and trying to talk to them. You can imagine it's sort of hard to get sort of like mid and higher up account managers at these big, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, like pharmaceutical companies to like get on the phone. And then also, I don't know, like we've been having some success with the customer interviews, but I think it's really difficult to talk at, like, you have to go up and down the stack so much to talk about, like, yeah, we're interested in knowing like what specific fields you maybe want to know, because we want to make sure we don't back ourselves into a corner where we like are removing data that they really want, or like what kind of charts do they want, but then also like zoom up 30,000 feet to say, like, do you even want this to be an Excel file that we email to you? Do you want this to be, a dashboard? And then, if they're sort of more technical leaning, then they'll say, oh, we've got our own internal system. That'd be great if we could like hook up that data too. And that's a whole nother mess. But kind of the one interesting thing that we found out, and we're just getting started on these customer interviews, but the one thing that we found out from one of the first interviews was that actually one of the really great experiences that they have is that sometimes they actually get sent PowerPoint slides that have the data and like a chart that the app could generate like in the slide. Mm-hmm. So we're like, oh, that's cool. Like, and when we were sort of prototyping the dashboards, we were thinking about, like, yeah, we need to make sure that if any graphs or charts can be like downloadable into like an image instead of just like a JavaScript thing on the page. But unfortunately, what we actually found out is what they really like is the fact that the slides are already in their company template, and that they can just copy paste the actual slide from like one PowerPoint window to the other PowerPoint window. So now it's like, oh, should we be generating like programmatic PowerPoint slides? And it just suddenly is like, oh, I thought we were trying to get away from like having Microsoft Office as our target platform here. So yeah, it's it'll be interesting to see what shakes out, and maybe there's a world where there's both. And yeah, it's been challenging trying to find the balance between if this software that we're writing should be like a tool for the people running the like productized consulting business to use, or if it should be like a SaaS offering that is sort of automating the deliverables. And I think right now we're definitely in the like, this is a helpful tool to help people like collect the data, and then ultimately they're responsible for, at the end of the month, kind of dumping the data out and then sending it off. Yeah.
It's super tricky when the person purchasing your in this case your consulting time is not the same people using the software, and it's probably not even the same people. Like, if this productized consulting sends it to a director or something, then they're probably not making a presentation. They're probably sending it to their reports, like their underlings to make a presentation out of it. So you have like at least 3, maybe 4 layers of indirection. So that's pretty tricky.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're trying, and there's different strategies, right? Like there's from our client's perspective, like they want to be like the consulting partner for these companies, and a lot of the value that they provide is like analysis of the data and like more qualitative data about like, yeah, you should expect 6 months after you're FDA approved, you need to be covered by this many payers, or Blue Cross Blue Shield like always needs this particular form to be filled out. Make sure you're doing that, before it launches. And then on the other hand, there's another part of the business which is really just like massaging the data that exists like publicly on the internet into a somewhat standardized form. And so there's plenty of challenges on both sides, and lots of work, and small team and small company. So we have to try to be making smart decisions about what we spend time on.
Yeah. It sounds like It sounds like generally that if the deliverable from the productized service to the executives is going well, then you may be more prudent to focus on the other side, the collecting information and getting it ready for the productized service to sell, which is probably not what the developer in you wants to do. But
well, yeah, and I want to help them be successful, and it's just things get a lot more complicated and sort of take longer when you're talking about like business processes and like how are we positioning our company and what are we selling and what are the deliverables, and all this is also happening within the lens of like an ongoing service that is running, right? So even if we want to switch the deliverable, unless we can like flip a switch and switch all clients at the same time, there's going to need to be this transitionary period where some people are still getting Excel files, some people are on the dashboard, and so we have to like have both code paths running, and so it's definitely a tricky thing to make the experience as seamless as possible.
Yeah. All right, interesting. Cool. So that's about your day job. How about boring Rails? You want to talk about that and what your challenges are, what you're thinking about doing with that?
Yeah. So I started this kind of side project, this batch of side projects a few years ago, and I had been doing kind of the whole build your own apps, indie hacker light type thing before, and I had never really gotten anything off the ground. So I had kind of in 2019, I had sort of deliberately said that like if I'm going to work on side project stuff, I should be trying to build assets, and that didn't necessarily have to be like generating money. It could be just something that if I put time in, I can eventually like see it sort of grow on its own a little bit. So actually the first thing I did in that sort of new spirit was some analytics sites that I built for these sort of alternative football leagues. So, the NFL has tons of sites, tons of tools, and, there's lots of content and analytics stuff already. But there are a couple, well, at the time there were, all these leagues have since been sort of ravished by the pandemic. But there was a couple new sort of minor leagues that were starting up, and then there's like the Canadian Football League, which is in some ways very similar to the NFL, but just slightly different. And so, I started building basically just kind of like clones of what was the industry standard for the NFL, but trying to port them over to these smaller leagues that there was basically less competition. So I built some projection models for Canadian football. And then there was a new league that started that was the Alliance of American Football, which was kind of a reboot of the XFL, but then the XFL itself got rebooted. It's all very complicated, and none of these things end up succeeding because, the NFL is basically like a huge, massive, like behemoth, monopoly on everything. But yeah, so that was kind of my first foray into like I guess I'll call it like the intersection of like development and like content production. So the idea was that I could write some code to like generate these analytics, and then I would spend some time getting it set up the first season, but then subsequent seasons it kind of just like runs, and week to week I'm not having to write more code. It's just pulling in that week's data and crunching the numbers and doing that. So that actually was going pretty well, and I ended up, before the league ended up shutting down in the middle of its first season, I had built like a Twitter account that was sort of like the kind of like the ESPN of this small league. I had built that up to around 4,000 Twitter followers, and overall for the lifetime of the project, I ended up doing like 1 million page views, and I had started kind of recruiting a team of writers to write stuff. There's lots of people that are trying to break into the like fantasy football industry, and these are like really attractive jobs, like be like a sports writer, but there's really very few opportunities, and kind of for better or worse, it's sort of in the journalism field where you're kind of expected to do like free work to get experience, and then hopefully down the line you can turn that into paid work. But I didn't have any money to pay anybody anyways, so it worked out nicely. And so at the peak of that, I had 6 different people that were submitting like weekly articles to the site. It was actually pretty cool. Even though the league shut down, like one of the guys was like a high school student. Like I didn't really know. He was just like, "Hey, I'll write this article." And I was like, "Okay, if you want to write it, I'll post it." And he ended up like using that to like get into like a journalism program in school, and it was kind of like a really good experience. And then he kind of turned that into like a way to make contacts at like a local football team that was near him, and got like a press pass and all that stuff. So that was kind of going well, and I was really liking that because it was fun and it was growing well. And then of course the league ended up. It's kind of an interesting story if anyone wants to look it up. But basically, one of the main investors of the league was sort of running some kind of fraud scheme that had to do with cryptocurrency, and didn't have all the money that they had pledged. So the league ran out of money to pay the players and pay the bills, and so it basically shut down right before the playoffs.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, so I was like, well, this kind of sucks. And then the next kind of season, I was like, well, I've got this other. There's the XFL is coming back, and then there's the Canadian Football League, and then COVID happens, and the Canadian Football League actually canceled their entire season, and they just announced that they're sort of delaying this current season, a couple months. So we'll see what happens. A lot of these smaller leagues are really dependent on ticket sales because it's more like a local entertainment event thing instead of like the NFL where you get these huge TV deals and you have all this money flowing into it, where they can sort of they would prefer to play with fans, but they can afford to just play with empty stadiums, kind of like your minor league baseball team. If nobody is going for free bobblehead day, like there's no money and it's not worth it.
Right. That's interesting. I love how you took something that was working for the NFL, working for the big times, and you kind of brought it to these more niche places. I think there's lots of places where like indie hackers could do that too. Like take something that is working pretty well and, don't clone it, but sort of replicate it in a different area, in a different niche. That's really neat. You said you grew the Twitter account to about 4,000 followers. Did you have any learnings from that? I know your current Twitter account is pretty high too, like 3,000 or something. What were your biggest things you learned from doing those things?
Well, the one it's almost a negative that I learned was that after your Twitter account gets like a few thousand followers, like Twitter becomes like insanely more addictive.
Yeah.
Because basically everything you post starts to get like at least a little bit of interaction. And so it's really easy to just like post and then refresh, and then like every time you come back you have like 5 notifications, and then you go look at the notifications and then reply to somebody, and then it just like it creates this loop. And when I just had kind of my own personal account and was just tweeting out what I had for lunch, or what was annoying me, like sometimes like nobody answers you, nobody's sending you messages, but once you start like getting a little bit more of a following, then people start like asking you questions unprompted, and you can always be trying to get bigger, and you sort of see those like feedback loops start working. So that was like a negative thing. Maybe the positive thing was just like that I kind of realized that like there's a lot of people on Twitter, and like there's a lot of people that just like post absolute like crap content. Like it's just nothing. They're just like shouting into the proverbial void. And even people that are like doing stuff, it's like, I'm just going to like automatically retweet every like blog post that I write. So the things that I was doing for this football account was like I would sign up for the like media list and get like a PDF with the like injury report from each team, and so I would just like open that PDF and then like find the the skill position players, like if the quarterback was out, and then like then turn that into a tweet, and instead of just like tweeting the PDF or like the tweet is really just like, hey, practice report for this team, like this quarterback is out. And so that was like, oh, this is content that you can't really get outside of this like PDF, but now it's like, properly formatted for the Twitter the Twitter context.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's sort of similar to what you were doing, what were you talking about at your job, where you're taking all this information all over the web for these drug trials and stuff, and you have to put it into tweetable content for the VP or whatever. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice too. The other thing you can do is like you can follow bigger accounts and just figure out like what they do, and then sort of apply it in your case. So like sometimes I would like live tweet like a game that was happening, and or just like turn on like a screen recorder and like capture like little video clips of like every touchdown. And there's definitely tons of things that you'll start picking up once you start making content of like, I can see that like actually like ESPN, they must have some template, because every time like someone scores a touchdown, like, they automatically generate this, graphic and, post in this format. And, it's really just like, reading from like the box score API. And suddenly you're like, well, I can like connect to this box score API and I can do some of that. So I don't know. It was kind of just my first foray into like intentionally trying to like grow a Twitter account. And, it was cool. Probably the coolest thing was like when you'd get these like super huge, like million follower accounts of people that are like literally on ESPN. They're like, like I'm watching this minor league football, and it's like, well, like I'm suddenly the leading, account for this thing because it's so small and nobody else has spent the time on it. So yeah, it was like Matthew Berry, who's like the big ESPN fantasy football, has like written books and has 2 million Twitter followers. It's like, like I don't know who this person is or like what this team is, but like it was really helpful. And I was like, it's like just me, a person.
Yeah, that's really neat. My camera does this thing where it shuts off after 30 minutes unless I run a command. By the way, if your camera does that, you can run gphoto2 -- summary, and it will not shut off anymore. So that's what I just did. All right. Cool.
Sounds like something Christian would make a YouTube video about.
Yeah, exactly.
How to shut off your camera. So.
Well, we thought so. It is a technical aside. So we have the same cameras, a Canon M50. A lot of still cameras, they have this requirement that they can only record for 30 minutes on video before they shut off. Otherwise, they have to be taxed as video cameras. So there's no technical reason. It's like a tax reason. And
this is like a Nathan for you plot.
Yeah, exactly. So there is software that will connect to your camera and make it think that it's connected the whole time, and then it won't shut off. So that's what gphoto 2 does.
Is that like, I think there's something that's like a battery that's like a charger that like it's like a fake battery or something.
So I have that too, yeah. So I have a fake battery that plugs in, and then I never lose power because I don't need a battery because it's plugged into the wall now. But it'll still shut off after 30 minutes unless I run the command. So fun tax.
Well, now that your camera's back, I want to hear about your Kaggle competition.
Sure. So Kaggle, last week I think I was in 7th place. This week I'm in 1st place, which is awesome. I'm in 2nd place actually. They just beat me about an hour ago. The team behind me, they were in 1st for a long time, way ahead of everyone. They're now a team of 4 people. Like they just brought on 2 more people, and so when you bring on people into your team, you basically combine your models, and you almost always get better.
Yeah.
And so they pulled just ahead of me, and the 2 of us are fairly far ahead of the 3rd place, and so that feels pretty good. There's still 25 days left, and I suspect that I'll probably be in the top 10 if I don't get any better, but I'll probably be like 10th, so I have to keep going if I want to stay on top. Yeah.
Can you remind me like what the like actual challenge is?
Yeah, sure. So it's indoor location and positioning. They basically had a bunch of volunteers go around shopping malls and hold out their Android phone with a specific app on it, and it collected Wi-Fi data as well as accelerometer, gyroscope, magnetometer, and rotation data. And they walk around these set paths throughout the shopping mall. And then, so they have all this ground truth data, so they know where they are because they tap on, like, I'm in front of this store or whatever as they walk around. And then they hold out 10,000 data points, and you have to basically predict those where they were for those 10,000 data points. Yeah, so it's run by Microsoft Research, so this is just a research thing, but you can imagine why some of this data might be valuable, like, if stores know where people are in their store, that can help them and stuff. And the reason it was interesting to me is because this is kind of what I did for a job for a long time. We didn't do it in yeah, we didn't do it in malls. We did it in healthcare, but
tracking equipment and beds and whatnot.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so it's validating that something I did in the past is sort of useful. I didn't use that much of the information I had in the past, although I did, so I knew not to waste very much time on Wi-Fi. A lot of people are spending a lot of time on Wi-Fi data, and I was like, no, you're never going to get better than, maybe 5 meters with Wi-Fi. So it's all...
So I've never done one of these competitions, but for some reason I have it in my brain that like something that happens fairly often is that as you get closer to the deadline, like the teams start combining, like the top two will just say like, it's kind of like a hedge, right? Like, hey, if we just like combine, then we can like guarantee that, one of us wins the top prize, or how does that work? Is that, do you like lose your place, or can like you still have like, oh, we're going to like, I'm thinking in a poker tournament, right? Like people like buy action of each other. So, if you're a good poker player, you get like 4 of your poker player friends and you say like, we'll each give each other like a quarter of our winnings. Is that kind of what happens? Or is it more like actually we're just joining your team and then like the old one sort of falls off the leaderboard?
Yeah, it's the second one. So you join together, and then all of your submissions are joined as well. So like this last team, they had like 100 each, say, and when they all join, now they have like 350 or something as their count. And so basically whatever the best was of the whole team, that becomes the best of the new team. And then, and that's exactly what happened. So I was actually asked to join a team too. I said I kind of want to figure out, this is my first Kaggle competition, so I was like, I want to see how far I get. And then I realized that people do this. Like basically you start seeing groups of people join together and increase their score quite a bit usually when they do that, because then you basically take the best, 4 models that you each have and combine them all, and you usually jump ahead a little bit. So if I want to try to be first, I have work to do.
If you're optimizing your payout, then maybe that's the strategy. But if you're just kind of doing it for fun or an experiment, then probably not worth having to like integrate code, or like, oh, now I have to like meet with these people every day to like go over the new findings or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, the top prize for this is $5,000, which is not nothing, but it's also not like some of the top prizes are like $30,000. So if the top prize was that
like
high,
the Netflix $1 million was like, like $1 million, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, all the top 10 teams just like decided to pool together.
Yeah. So I would probably do that if it was that substantial. It's been really neat. I've had to do this competition is neat because there's images, there's recurrent data, there's just regular tabular data, there's like pre and post processing, so it's not just all AI. So there's just lots of stuff, and since I'm sort of relearning all this AI stuff, it's been a really good competition to like get me back into all of that stuff, because there's just all the different parts that you might think you can do. So
yeah. All the like the AI and the machine learning stuff, it's kind of interesting to me, but it feels like one of those things, and maybe you have a better sense of this, like it feels like it's a very academic discipline, which I think sometimes it seems like a lot more impenetrable than it really is, especially when it comes to software. Like, and I don't know why. I think I have this like bias of like when I see like machine learning papers and stuff, it's like, oh, like this is like really complicated math, and then it's like, well, actually, it's just like the nomenclature, right? Or like the way that we use like symbolic math is hard to understand. But if you just said like, here's pseudocode, it's like, oh, this is like totally understandable. So I think about that, and then I think about the fact that a lot of like software research in academia is like mostly junk and not really relevant. Like, in other fields you'd say like, oh yeah, if someone has like a PhD and like, in the subject, that like maybe they're like an expert, but like, I don't know. I haven't worked with a lot of like computer science PhDs, but like any of the people that I sort of look up to as like writing great software are not like, it's almost the opposite. It's almost like people that are like, oh, I'm like a high school dropout, but I've been like building building software. So I'm curious how much of that is like this sort of fake difficulty of like, it's hard to like understand the academic paper, but the concepts are actually sort of trivial.
Yeah, you hit on a bunch of different points, which are all pretty good. So one is, so a lot of PhDs, like they have to get published. And so in order to get published, you have to sound very smart to other people. And you have to provide publishable results on data sets that people already know about. And so in those two things combined, basically, you are solving problems that are really forced. So you're like trying to solve this specific problem data set, which has already been solved 100 times, but you're trying to do it a little better. And you have to use the most complicated math you can in order to show that you understand what you're talking about. And so those two things combined definitely make it so that most papers are like, unless you really know the math, that you just can't understand it. A really good example is, so fast.ai, by Jeremy Howard. He doesn't do this. He goes with code, and he tries to explain papers, some of the papers that they use to make the results, work in code. And so he'll say, okay, here's this paper. You should, read the introduction, read the conclusion, whatever. Look at all this math, and then realize it is this one line of code. Like this whole paper means you should do this one thing, and that's that. So that's exactly right. Like, PhDs try to push the state of the art by understanding, like the fundamental things going on, but really it's like one line of code that you change, and then it works. In terms of actual software creation, like having a PhD is probably not great. It's kind of like the second, like all the people who read the PhD's paper and then understand it and then write the libraries that everyone else can use. That's
Yeah, because I know you were at least thinking about like, do you want to go do like a master's program or something? And I don't know. Did you ever come to a conclusion on that of like, it wasn't going to be as helpful as just like taking, the 40 hours you would be studying and doing 40 hours of coding, or did that factor into the analysis?
Yeah, so I'm still not sure. I actually applied for a master's. I haven't heard back from yet. So I get, I'll just wait to see if I get in, and then I'll have to make a decision. Yeah. The reason I was interested in masters is because now you can do masters online. It's not very expensive, and you go at your own pace. So like, I could take 3 years and just do it half time. And it basically what it would, I could more or less get the same content online, but it would force me to do it is one reason.
Yeah.
I look back at what I did in school, and the classes, like, you go really deep, and you're forced to learn it if you want a good grade. And I understand stuff. I had a pretty good time in school, like understanding stuff from classes. So some people have really bad experience. I had a particularly good one, and so, like, I think I would, pretty more deeply understand the stuff. And my goal would be to be able to read the research papers and, break down the whole thing into one line of code, like that is kind of the goal with that. I don't think it would help me career-wise necessarily, unless I want to go get a job in like a big tech company doing AI stuff, which I don't think I want to do. I don't know, but it's more like, for 10 grand and half time for 3 years, and then I get a master's in something that I think is really interesting. That seems appealing.
And it's probably not that drastically different than like, the most, the nicest like paid, course on it or something. And then you get some, credentialing out of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like I often think about like, if I could just like go back to school and like do my like degree over again, I'd be like, wow, this would be like so easy.
Yeah.
Especially like the software stuff. Cause it's like I just remember like when I was in undergrad, like, toiling away at these programs to like do this, like the most basic stuff. And I was just like, I could probably do this like way, way better now. And sometimes you just have these like weird, like, what if you just like re-enrolled in school and like just pretended that you were, I'm a 20-year-old as well. Like,
right.
Like, I have some money. I can just like rent a cheap college campus and just like, pretend and just go through school for 4 more years again.
Yeah. And then, yeah.
Seems like the plot of like a teen comedy.
Yeah. Or Van Wilder, I think, was one where he stayed in school for 8 years or something. Yeah. So we'll see. I want to continue. So I want to still do SaaS stuff, but I also want to continue learning about the AI stuff. Some of it is I want to I don't think AI is going to be, the savior of everything. But I do think it's really, really interesting, and we can now start solving problems that were impossible before. And so I just think that's really interesting. And so I wanted to learn more about like the frontiers of that. And that's really hard to do unless you understand the math. So
I think there's definitely a lot of interesting opportunities too. And it's sort of like a little bit of a moat as well. Like you could probably build a product that has like some kind of like state of the art, like machine learning, but then like the rest of it is like pretty basic, like CRUD stuff, but it would be like way better than the other stuff that doesn't have that like extra, secret sauce. And it's not exactly like, oh yeah, in just like a weekend I can build, something like that. I mean, like when I think about the work that I'm doing, there's all kinds of problems like that. I mean, of like, oh, take this arbitrary web page and like detect if like there's been a change to the policy, right? And it's like, oh, well, okay. The naive thing is like, well, like you could MD5 the HTML or something and like see if that changed, or like check the text, but it's not going to get you very good results. But I'm sure that if you had a little bit more knowledge about like how can I pull out like do like a topic, analyzer or something on the text, and then like count the number of like distinct keywords or something, and then compare that, it'd be like, oh, this is like night and day better, but it's not actually that hard or anything like too onerous. But then suddenly you've got like the world's best, like, service that will send you an email when a website changes, and you've eliminated like 90% of the like false positives.
Yeah. It's funny how often that is true. Like it's using a lot of these libraries. Like the hard part is in figuring the stuff out, and a lot of the hard part is in generating the data set and stuff. Once you do that, it's like relatively easy. Like the actual modeling and training is relatively easy compared to all the rest of that stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting. That gets into your hot take idea. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
You told me that you had an idea that you wanted a hot take on, and so I said that you could present it, and I would see what I said. So
yeah. So I and I think you are as well, like watch lots of YouTube videos, and something that I think is fairly common knowledge about people that make YouTube videos is like the thumbnail and the sort of title of the video is like almost everything, at least for a certain subset of like, getting popular, right? I mean, if you're doing YouTube for some other reason than A, what is wrong with you, and B, don't care about like a clickbaity thumbnail. But that's kind of like the name of the game. And so I was curious. I know that there are tools that do like AI powered like headline writing. I think I forget what it was called. It was like Lime or Lime something.
Copy.ai is one that uses GPT-3. That's a recent one. There might be a new one, different one.
Yeah, so I just thought that was kind of an interesting space to explore, because on YouTube it like goes one level further. So there's like the title, which is like, I don't know, like you actually have like 30 characters to work with, but then there's the thumbnail, which is the whole thing. And I don't know if it's more of an art or a science in like generating these thumbnails, but I would be curious your take on like a service that would crawl popular YouTube videos and like either detect like patterns to be able to like generate templates, or like show you sort of the elements that are working.
Yeah,
because you can see this if you ever look at like there's like the Fire tab or whatever that's like the trending videos, and it's like all these weird celebrities that you have never heard of that have suddenly like more audience than most cable news channels or whatever. And you can sometimes, if you look at that page, like scroll down and you'll find like there's 3 people that are all doing like basically the same video with like a very similar thumbnail. So hot take.
Yeah. I definitely think it's interesting. It's a way so people always complain about the YouTube algorithm be ever changing and stuff. So this would be kind of a way to automatically stay on top of, how that algorithm is working. So that's interesting. It's a little like, I sort of despise some of those videos, so it's like sort of feeding it's like, I can basically, for a thumbnail, if you, put a scantily clad woman or man on the front of it, you probably get the most clicks. And then apart from that, maybe like, but it would be really interesting to see other than that, what would return views, especially if you could start suggesting things. So like if you had, for example, like all of the brand stuff uploaded for a YouTube thumbnail, and then you could auto generate like, here's 10 thumbnails we think they'll do pretty well. Pick your favorite or something. That's sort of like, so it's definitely what people kind of already do. There are tools that let you easily create like YouTube thumbnails or Facebook posts or Twitter, social cards or whatever. So yeah, if you added the element of like also, and we think this will do well, I think that's definitely super valuable. It is a little bit like, feeding the algorithm, it's like self-reinforcing or something. Yeah. But that's interesting.
I think my views have changed on that a little bit. Like I think I was definitely like, like this is probably like bad, but I forget who it was, but I was watching some video that was like about the meta aspect of like, a YouTube video about making content on YouTube, and it was kind of like, like you have to clickbait, but like the video has to be good too, right. Otherwise like people won't watch, and then so it's kind of like, I don't know, for better or worse, it's like the table stakes are like you have to make something exciting, and then you have to have like good content to back it up. So yeah, obviously there's probably like, those like weird ads at the bottom of like web page that's like, you won't believe what this celebrity looks like now, and you always go to those sites and then are disappointed when it's like a 75 slideshow that never actually shows you what you wanted. But I don't know, there's probably like some gray area where you could sort of like ethically clickbait, and I think it's kind of interesting. It's just like, how do you take something that's so unstructured that is like this, like you said, kind of this black box algorithm, and like, is there anything you can do to sort of reverse engineer what might be successful?
Yeah, it's also titles are an interesting one too, because I've definitely watched some videos just because of the title, and then like, oh, this is a bad video. But then I've also watched really good videos that had like a bad title, but I was like invested in that particular YouTuber or whatever. And so, for that, it would have been a lot better to have a title that probably would have done better. It's also, so Christian and I sort of talked about a similar idea, which is YouTube has this thing now where you can put timestamps in your description, and then it appears like on the right-hand side, like chapter markers. And we thought it'd be really cool if you could automatically create those. And then like after you automatically create them, then you can also slice up the video in like, 1 to 2 minute increments. And then people use that as like their, like on Twitter or whatever, like a video thing. So this is all kind of like, I could see a tool that sort of does all that. It's like you upload your hour-long video, it slices it up for you. It suggests, thumbnails. It suggests titles. It says, here are your different tweets. Just click, schedule tweet or whatever. I think that would do super well as a tool, if you could crack all those nuts.
Yeah. The thing that I think about with that is like, you have to like thread the needle a little bit, I think, because someone that is successful enough to sort of need that, like, to justify like, oh, I need to pay like $100 a month for this app or whatever. There's kind of this like low end market of people that you basically are just hiring video editors. So like lots of Twitch streamers sort of do this, right? So like they'll stream for 8 hours and then they pay somebody like, the equivalent of, $10 an hour or whatever to like be their video editor. And so they just say like, all right, well, you watched this 4 hours, like cut out like a 20-minute segment of it, and then like do all the analytics. And even I think some of the times the arrangement is more like, oh yeah, you run the YouTube channel and like you get like 20% of the ad revenue,
right?
In exchange for like you get to be the official content person. So it's like when you're super successful like that, you can either have people on staff that are sort of doing that and they're like the best at it, or you can sort of pay these people, and you get kind of like the geo arbitrage, I'm sure, of like, somebody in not in the US is can edit videos for $2 an hour or whatever, and it's a great job for them that they can do remotely and work 5 hours a week or whatever. So I don't know, I think you'd have to strike the right balance. And then if you get super successful, like then you have like you're like MCN and you have a team of people that are handling all that for you. So you don't want to be in there fiddling with that software. So maybe that's like actually the market is like you try to sell it to both of those groups, like people that are video editors, or people that work at big agencies. I don't know.
Yeah. That's, so there was someone who went on the Run With It podcast, who talked about like this clipping idea. So clipping for YouTube. And she sort of said the same thing. She said, you need people who are successful enough where they're willing to pay some money in order to get it done, but not successful enough where they already have someone doing it, which is once you get successful enough, you have a VA or something that just does it for you.
Yeah. And at that point, it's like, maybe they could save a few hours like using the software, but it's like you're a few levels removed from like, oh yeah, like this is so helpful for you, managing your YouTube channel. It's like, well, that's what my YouTube channel manager does.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I think you have to catch them before they get that popular. Yeah, cool. Did you want to talk about boring Rails some? We have 15 minutes left or so.
Oh, sure. It's kind of related to that, I guess, but I've been wondering if you have any hot takes on why is there not a static site tool, template, or whatever that is like specifically optimized for developer blogs? Because it's only developers that really actually use these things. I mean, I guess there's like marketing, tech people at marketing agencies that like, sort of, I think it's like kind of swindling people to like, yeah, we're going to use like this Next.js Gatsby site to build your like e-commerce or your company website or whatever. But like, I'd say that probably 90% of people that use static site generators are like developers that are making either like a blog or a documentation site for their project. And maybe I just don't know the right one, but like I've yet to find like a good one that has like great like syntax highlighting. One of the things I've been trying to do recently in the Boring Rails blog is like if I have a blog post about some code and I want to like highlight specific lines in the code block, like none of that is sort of supported in Markdown. I mean, Markdown can do like, code blocks, and a lot of the tools will have, syntax highlighting, or you can like drop this magical CSS file that does some bizarre format that, syntax highlights the code. But it's like, oh, well, I want to like highlight this one line, and suddenly it's like, well, you have to like write your own custom plugin or like add some JavaScript thing. And I don't know, it just feels like for the amount of people that write static sites that have code blogs, this would be something that is way better. Or everyone is like, yep, use this thing. It's weird to me that like there's people that can make sites that have like VS Code in JavaScript in the web page, like a full text editor, but then we haven't sort of, at least that I know of, like ported that over into like the display of source code.
Yeah, that's tricky. So what do you use now for your site?
So I use Jekyll, and it does the basic syntax highlighting, and then I have a little bit of JavaScript that I put this like meta tag above the code block, and it sort of just does a search and then wraps that in some CSS to like do the highlighting.
Okay, interesting.
But even that was like, that's not a built-in thing, and it's like, well, wouldn't everybody want this?
Yeah. So I use Jekyll too. I used to use, actually my Chris Richard site is still on Gatsby. Gatsby I think was supposed to be that. Like Gatsby was like, everyone had super high hopes for it, and now some people still really like it. But I think it was in some ways too simple, and in some ways way too complicated for its own good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you use Gatsby, but it's like a GraphQL. It allows you to tap into different sources. So like you can call an API if you want. You can also have your static like blog posts or whatever. You can have all this stuff, and then it compiles that all into a static site. And that had really good support for things like code highlighting and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. A site that gets this pretty right, I think, is dev.to. Their Markdown, their flavor of Markdown has really good syntax highlighting because the whole site is, built for developers. But
yeah.
I don't know, and it's open source, so you could look at the source and see what they use. But
yeah, I think it's actually fairly similar, and like it has good syntax highlighting, and it's like syntax highlighting. Maybe it's just like that's as far as anybody ever goes. But like one example is like sometimes you want to like display the file name of a file in your like little code snippet, right? And out of the box in Markdown, like there's no way to like annotate that this code block has this like piece of metadata, so you can't necessarily like style it differently. So you just have to like put the file name as like a code comment at the top of the file.
Yeah.
Right. And even things like oh, can I have like a little button to like copy the source code without necessarily like copying the line numbers or copying the HTML? I don't know. Like I think you're right that a lot of these static site generators sort of build themselves as like this is like a developer friendly thing, but like that means like, yeah, you can like connect to a GraphQL
Right.
API, and you can write React components instead of markup, and it like has the world's fastest like hot reloading. And it's like, I don't know, it's more about the act of building the blog and not like what a developer like. I've yet to see a static site that is like, this is the best like output,
Yeah.
right? And maybe it's because like, that's more of like a design opinion of like,
Right.
it's like I need a static site engine like designed by a nice designer, but like built by a developer that knows how to translate that. I don't know. I need like the Tailwind. I need like the
Right.
Tailwind static site generator or something.
It actually reminds me a little of so there are a few places. So newline.co is one. They basically make books, and they're doing a lot of online stuff now. And they had to write their own, I think, or they had to significantly modify something for exactly the same thing that you said. Like they wanted to produce PDFs also, so that's a big deal.
Yeah.
But they wanted like the name of the file there. They wanted to be able to highlight certain lines and stuff. Yeah, so I mean, there's like a more powerful syntax highlighting thing. I can see the need for. So yeah, if you're making books, you can also do. So when I wrote my ebook, I used ASCII doc instead of Markdown because it let you do things like that. Like it had much more involved syntax highlighting stuff. But I made PDFs. I don't think it made very good HTML.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a case that if you want a truly great developer blog, like you have to customize it yourself. But it's just always surprising to me that if you ever go on someone's blog and like the code isn't highlighted or it doesn't have all these like bells and whistles, and then if you see somebody that has very clearly like a custom site that can like, oh, I can like subtly pulse like the line that I deleted or removed, or like you can toggle the syntax highlighting, or it's like a tab thing where there's two files that are related. Part of this too is in like, and then it still needs to like work in RSS feed and
Right, sure.
All that. But yeah, I'm surprised that doesn't exist for the amount of people that build static site generators and the amount of people that use it that are basically writing a like development blog.
Yeah. Yep. All right, cool. We've got a few minutes left. Anything else you want to talk about, or where can people find you online?
No, that's all I got. You can find me at Boring Rails if you want to learn more about the boring way to build Rails applications, or on Twitter at _Swanson.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming out to makers.dev. All right.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
See ya.